Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the second session of today's conference. My name is Marco Menon and I'll be the chair for this panel. We are perfectly on time and it's my pleasure to introduce the next speaker, Professor Seung Chul, graduated in physics from Korea University, subsequently obtained an MA in theology from the Methodist Theological University in Seoul, and earned his PhD in theology at the University of Basel, which is familiar to you because it's in Switzerland. He is currently director of the Nanzan Institute of Religion and Culture in Nagoya, in Japan, and is professor at the Faculty of Arts at the same university. His research interests focus on bioethics, Christian literature, and the relationship between science and religion. Just let me mention at least a couple of books of the many he published in the last decades. Let me begin from a book published in Japanese in 2009. I quote the titles in English: God and Jin, The Christianity in the Age of Genetic Engineering. Then I like to quote Cherry Blossoms and Christ, Japanese Christianity in the Light of Japanese Literature from 2012, published in Korean. Then Non-Abiding and Herring, A Buddhist Imagination of Christian Theology, 2015. And last but not least, a book from 3 years ago, The Center is Everywhere, Christianity in Dialogue with Religion and Science. Today, Professor's key presentation is entitled Eat When You Are Hungry, Ethics of Eating from a Perspective of Interreligious Dialogue. Now, as previously, you will have 50 minutes, and then we'll leave the discussion 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and the floor is yours.
Thank you for your very generous introduction. And I also want to appreciate my colleague, friend Adriano, Prof. Adriano Fabris, for his invitation to this beautiful conference, and also to the Faculty of Theology at Lugano, and also the Swiss National Fund for this invitation from me. When I attend in this conference like this, I always found that the morning session is better. So I said to my colleagues, happy are those who made presentation before eating. But, okay, I'll read what I have prepared for this presentation. And the title of my presentation is the Eat When You Are Hungry, Ethics of Eating Food from a Perspective of Interreligious Dialogue, mainly from the perspective of this Buddhist Christian dialogue. So, no, it's okay, sorry. We are what we eat, and we are how we eat. And it is we who do the eatings. As they say, we can tell who you are if you tell us what you eat. Thus, the issue of eating food is intrinsically linked to the human being's self-understanding, which is carried out in their relations with themselves and with the world in which they think they find themselves, and also with what they believe provides both humans and the world with their ultimate foundation, which we call usually God. The ethical meaning of eating food emerges with the awareness that eating fosters a relationship between the eater and the eaten, because what and how we eat inevitably connects us to other living things such as animals and plants, and also the traditions and habits of eating of other peoples in a different religion and culture, and also the environment of the earth from which and in which we produce food. When the ethics of eating food matter, we often find that such discussions occur by considering that ethics initially refers to the debates surrounding the places where people are accustomed to living, ethos. Ethos means an accustomed place or habitation from which the following meanings are derived. For example, customs attitudes, moods, as well as the boundaries between the human habitats and unknown beyond them. Furthermore, ethos as a place for ethics also implies a closed space, room, or place where animals are kept, and thus ethos also refers to the boundary between humans and animals, as well as the distinction between wild animals and domestic animals. In this sense, Peter Sloterdijk, for example, Sloterdijk's argument that human history can be understood as the history of securing living space and domesticating animals resonates with the essence of ethos as boundary drawing. Sloterdijk, as you know, Sloterdijk interprets the essence of humanism as the domestication of the animalistic nature in humanity, and thus he welcomed genetic engineering experiments as a precursor to the emergence of a new human nature, which could make possible what traditional humanism could not. So when we discuss ethics, we are accustomed to asking where we must and may belong. We try to place ourselves in the proper context. If that is the case, then ethics is fundamentally linked to an awareness of humanity's place in the universe, and such awareness includes the establishment of boundaries between the natural, wild space and the artificial space created by humans. The theological and ethical controversy over Dolly the crowned sheep, which was sparkled by the birth of sheep through cloning in 1996, that phenomenon provides a good example of how debates on ethics evolve around the boundaries and who can draw the proper boundaries. For example, is it God or is it human being who can draw boundaries? The question of where the boundaries to be placed and who should draw the line is directly or indirectly connected to the question of whether the boundary is already determined, and if so, whether humans are permitted to change that boundary lines. The harsh controversies regarding the issue of human cloning among theologians, such as those between Paul Ramsey and Joseph Fletcher, which have made significant contributions to the birth of the discipline of bioethics, they can be summarized as an uncompromising collision of two catchphrases. Paul Ramsey insists man ought not to play God, and Joseph Fletcher insists let's play God. In 2009, I could publish a book on God and Gene, and the book was about the catchphrases playing God. And I also found that it's very interesting. What if there's no God to play? Then, for example, in Buddhist countries, for example, Japan, then what can be the issues for discussion? If there's no God, who can play God, and what does it mean playing God? In this sense, it is understandable that the ethics of eating we discussed today, the ethics of eating were initially developed in a close relation with biotechnology and bioethics. Then Menon, who was the director of the Center for Applied Bioethics at the University of Nottingham, United Kingdom, and who is considered to have coined the term of food ethics, made clear that his concerns are with a branch, quote, with a branch of social ethics which is relevant to public policy and which in turn will guide the implementation of necessary regulations on the employment of biotechnology in food production. Sorry, I was late. Thus, for many ethicists, the issue of eating food is accepted as a question of where to find the boundary between what we may eat and what we may not. The question of what we may eat and what we may not eat produce the controversy pro and contra of eating meat, the alternative proposal of veganism or vegetarianism, for example, as a substitute for meat eating. The question of the boundaries between what we may do to produce food and what we may not do gives rise to a discussion about organic farming as an alternative to factory farming. The health and sustainability of humans and the environment were, as we heard in the morning, are the key words prevailing in those debates. There have already been numerous discussions about eating food from biological, nutritional, anthropological, economical, ethical, and religious perspectives. Some maintain that avoiding meat eating is an inevitable choice, not only beneficial for our physical and spiritual health, but also for the sustainability of the earth's resources. Vegetarianism, veganism, and those with a preference for foods of any kind fall into the category of favoring or avoiding a specific type of food. Furthermore, I think the issue of eating food prompts us to consider the bodily and the spiritual foundations of our being. In the context of this presentation, my presentation, eating food is intrinsically related to the religious consciousness of human beings. Recent studies on the history of religion reveals that the issue of eating food played an indispensable role in building an exclusive identity of any religious community by selecting and rejecting specific foods. Since ancient times, humans have identified themselves with gods with whom they have coexisted, and have related themselves to the world in which they have lived. Just as the kashrut in Judaism and halal in Islam show, favoring or avoiding a specific food determines the exclusive identity of a particular religious community. In this sense, we can agree with the opinion that, I quote, recipes for cooking could be a kind of ritual manual that can tell us more about the complex things we call religion and how they have been cooked and how food will be served in the future. Also, when we see the recipes of a specific religious community, then we can understand that religion more better than we read the dogmatic books or something like that. The difference in the habit of eating food between human beings and other living things is emphasized when the differences in their evolutionary process are highlighted. As anthropologists report, cooking food and eating together are remarkable characteristics of humans, distinguishing them from other living things. Unlike other animals, humans evolved to eat together and engage in reproductive behavior individually. The role of eating food in the evolutionary process of human beings is said to take center stage. Human beings eat together with others. Eating and sharing food strengthens the bonds between individuals and foster an ethical attitude of consideration for others, all of which contribute to the viability of the human race. I think that could be a scientific explanation of human beings' habits of eating and cooking together, which theologians often express in a rather modest way. The theologians will rather say, food is a holy and humbling mystery, which means that food provides us with the energy of life and also teaches us that we rely on other living things for our own survival. Eating food becomes a genuine theological or religious theme in the sense that eating is not merely a means of connecting the body and the mind. It also connects humans with the divine and with other beings. This is because food possesses spiritual significance. Eating is the very essence of a person, and eating also expresses the soul of the people, for eating is a communal act. The second part of my presentation is on the biblical and Christian wisdom on eating food. First, I want to outline very briefly what the Bible and the Christian faith said about eating food, as concisely as possible, so briefly. The issue of eating food in the Bible, especially in the teachings and behaviors of Jesus and his disciples in early Christianity, reveals some critical moments that could be meaningful in our age of crisis and conflict. the crisis in the human-nature relationship and the crisis of conflict among religions and ideologies. Above all, the taboos listed in the Leviticus in chapters 11 in the Old Testament became the model for the extensive and systematic Jewish dietary laws. This rule had a significant impact on Jewish nutritional practices to the point that even in the New Testament era, non-Jews who enjoyed pork, for example, were considered unclean, impure by this standard. As suggested by the episode of Cornelius in the New Testament Act, chapter 10, the new perspective that the repulsive animals Peter saw in his vision could be made clean and thus edible through divine power, that story served as a symbolic message supporting the legitimacy of missionary work among the Gentiles. The mission to the Gentiles begins by crossing the boundaries drawn by traditional taboos regarding specific food considered impure. I will cite this Bible. About noon the following day, as they were on their journey and approaching the city, Peter went up on the roof to pray. He became hungry and wanted something to eat, and while the meal was being prepared, he fell into a trance. He saw heaven open and something like a large sheet being let down to us by its four corners. It contained all kinds of four-footed animals, as well as reptiles and birds. Then a voice told him, "Get up, Peter, kill and eat." "Surely not, Lord," Peter replied. "I have never eaten anything impure or unclean like those." The voice spoke to him a second time. "Do not call anything impure that God has made clean." This happened 3 times, and immediately the sheet was taken back to heaven. Also, that is the story about telling the beginning of the mission to the pagans, so-called the pagans. The mission was begun with the overcrossing, get over this the taboo, these boundaries. Jesus also declared that all foods are clean. He criticized the Jewish dietary laws, saying that it is not what goes into the mouth that defiles a person, but what comes out of the mouth. However, it is not easy to affirm that Jesus and his disciples ate anything indiscriminately. But St. Paul also stated, on the one hand, that since all foods came from God, there's no problem in eating it with thanksgiving. On the other hand, Paul recommended a self-restriction of eating everything to care for those whose faith is weak and therefore cannot eat all, and also to restrain oneself from blaming those who eat everything. I skipped the quote. The same restraint is recommended in matters of eating food that has been sacrificed to idols. Some people are aware that idol is nothing, so the food sacrificed to eat it has no power to influence our faith. However, some people with weak faith and knowledge, they are concerned that consuming such defiled food, they will erode their faith. Paul's admonitions are mainly pointed to those who think their faith is mature. Paul said, quote, "Be careful, however, that the exercise of the right does not become a stumbling block to the weak." And also Paul continues, "Do not destroy the work of God for the sake of food. All food is clean, but it is wrong for a person to eat anything that causes someone else to stumble. It is better not to eat meat or drink wine or to anything else that will cause your brother or sister to fall." What is essential in the issue of eating food for Jesus and also for Paul is that they demand us to be free from attachment or free from discrimination toward a specific food. Jesus did not adhere to the traditional Jewish eating food description, which was the reason that he was criticized as a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. Instead, Jesus broke with the customs of self-proclaimed religious people and associated with the sinners, so-called sinners, opening up the exclusive table where a specific group of people shared and divided certain religious privileges among themselves. This was a deliberate act that demonstrated the universality of the kingdom of God without boundaries. So, I want to skip the conclusion of this second part. We can say the Christian tradition of eating food did not draw a sharp line between what one may eat and what one may not eat, just as we can find in the Jewish traditions. Instead, as we have seen in Paul's attitude toward the issue of eating food above, Christian faith taught freedom with a consideration for the weak in their faith. Even though the history of Christianity and the history of monastic life especially shows us various understanding of eating food, especially the question of eating meat, we can say roughly that the spirit of the freedom of Christians allowed Christians a rather broad choice list of eating food. To put the same thing the other way around, Christians are asked to get over the discriminatory exclusiveness regarding the question of what we may eat and what we may not. The third, the Zen Buddhism on eating food. Then what can we learn from Buddhism about eating food, the issue of eating food? When discussing Buddhist attitude toward eating food, we must first acknowledge that there has been no uniform disciplines or habit in Buddhism regarding which foods are permitted to be eaten and which are not. When it comes to Buddhism and the ethics of eating food in Buddhism, there has been diversity, just as there have been various Buddhist traditions throughout different times and throughout different religions. Obviously, but we could already say that from the very early Buddhism, there has existed a very strong anti-hunting and anti-animal killing agenda, and veganism was considered as an appropriate dietary regime to reach purity and moral perfection. However, in detail, there has been a variety of eating food habits. So, we cannot say in one word that Buddhism allows us to eat this one and or Buddhism prohibits us to eat one. There's such a variety of the traditions and habits. But what is important is Buddhism did not ban eating meat itself, as in Hinduism, or follow the discriminative rules prohibiting eating together with the untouchables, as was described in the caste system of Brahmanism in India. According to the Mahaparinibbana Sutra, which contains the end of Gautama Buddha's life, Gautama Buddha became ill from food poisoning after eating mushrooms that a man named Kunda Kumaraputta had offered. Kunda, this man, is said to have been a metal worker, and under the caste system of that time, that job, this metal worker, belonged to a lower caste. Despite this, the Buddha accepted the offering of some from such a low caste. As recorded in the same sutra, he also showed compassion to the Kunda, ensuring he would not regret having caused his death through Kunda's offerings. This story reveals that Buddha was not reluctant to eat something donated by then current outcast people, which highlights one of the most essential themes to remember when discussing the issue of eating food in Buddhism. Sorry, I'm always late showing this. So Buddha himself once immersed in the aesthetic practices which were a standard form in India at the time, including fasting and eating only one grain rice per day. However, he was unable to attain enlightenment through these aesthetic practices, so he abandoned asceticism, regained his strength by eating milk porridge offered by a village girl, and then attained an enlightenment while meditating under a Bodhi tree, becoming the Buddha, the enlightened one. As that story shows, we cannot say that all desires, including appetites, are completely denied. It is acceptable in Buddhism to satisfy the minimum appetite necessary to maintain physical and mental health and continue spiritual practice. What is unacceptable is excessive eating driven by desire or being overly particular about food and seeking out delicious flavors. In other words, the basic Buddhist attitude toward food is to consume the minimum amount necessary without attachment to it. As stated, Buddhism from its beginning has denied fasting as a spiritual practice and acknowledged the necessity of consuming the bare minimum amount of food. By all means, Buddhism prohibits drinking liquor through its 5 precepts, which prohibit killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, and intoxication. Drinking alcohol itself was not regarded as a sin, but was forbidden due to its bad result. Furthermore, as I said, eating meat itself was not banned as in Indian Buddhism. In the sense, it's very important, the eating meat itself was not banned in Indian Buddhism in the sense that monks should eat without discrimination whatever was donated to them. Such a spirit of respecting those who offer food as offering was carried forward in Mahayana Buddhism, which can be inferred from the fact that monks' behavior of begging food was not only for the sake of monks themselves, but also for the ordinary people who cannot be monks and live in the secular world. Begging and offering were ways provided for ordinary people to attain Buddhist ideals. The bhikshu, that means the Indian word that means monk, or the bhikshuni, the Indian word meaning the nun. This bhikshu and bhikshuni meant initially beggars. When it was time to eat, a ascetic monk would beg for food and eat whatever lay believers offered them without being picky. And this practice of begging is stipulated in the 12 ascetic practices of early Buddhism. Ascetic practices is a transcription of the Sanskrit word dutta, which originally means to cast off. And it refers to the practice of casting off the defilements of the mind and abandoning greed for food, clothing, and shelter in order to devote oneself to aesthetic practices. Chinese Buddhism differed from Indian Buddhism in that the Chinese Buddhism from the beginning had a community living in a temple built with the support of the state. So they did not need to rely on begging for food. The focus of the ethics of eating food shifted from the controversy of eating meat to the community and ordinary life of the monks, which ultimately gave rise to Zen Buddhism, regarded as a Buddhist tradition most deeply rooted in Chinese culture. In Zen Buddhism, all aspects of daily life, including farming and household chores, all aspects of daily life were regarded as Buddhist practices. These practices were called samu, working in the temple, and were considered to be as crucial as Zen meditation. A Chinese Zen monk named Baizhang Huahai is said to have established a set of rules for Zen monks known as the Baizhang Zen monastic regulations. He said in that regulation, if one does not work for a day, one should not eat for a day. In light of those considerations, another Zen monks, Ling Yu, a prominent Zen master in the Chinese Tang dynasty, reminds his monastic audience of his indebtedness to others, and he strongly criticized monks who abuse the privilege bestowed on them by failing to approach their religious vocation conscientiously. He said, "How can you declare I am a monk as soon as you receive the monastic precept? The lay donors provide the daily necessities and monastery's permanent property. Without understanding or properly considering where they come from, you mistakenly assume they are supplied in a natural way as a matter of fact. Such a spirit of respecting the intention of the food donors is vividly alive in the meditation ceremony that monks repeatedly perform before eating. Monks recite the following 5 contemplations before eating. First, they cite, regarding how great an effort brought to us this food, we consider where it has come from. Second, we reflect on whether our virtue and practice are worthy of receiving this offering. Third, to protect the mind, abandoning our mistakes from greed, hate, and delusion is essential. Fourth, truly, this good medicine is for healing our fragile bodies. Fifth, now we receive this food for the sake of accomplishing Buddha's way. So I think it is clear why monks cite these 5 reflections every time before eating. Wanting to be free from the attachment to food, they accept it with gratitude to the donors. So to the donors, their gratitude to the donors and to the cook and to all living things whose lives were taken so that they could be eaten. I think eating is rather a sorrowful behavior of confessing one's absolute weakness and sin, which means we could not live without depriving the lives of other living beings. So in this sense, if I may say symbolically, the banquet table in Zen temple is then a confessional booth for the sacrament of penance. The writings on cooking and eating by Dogen, who represents the Soto school of Zen in Japan, inherited those traditions of Buddhist monastic relations for the everyday life of monks in the temples. The instructions for the cook, Tenjo Kokun, is an instruction on how and with what state of mind a monk should prepare food in a temple. While the other book, the Dharma for Taking Food, Fushukan Hopo, teaches a monk how and with what state of mind a monk should eat. Whereas the aesthetic tradition in Christianity and also in Buddhism in common had often tended to view the body as different from and less than the soul, which had yielded the mortification of the body, the strong emphasis, even denial of the body. And while we could find a similar attitude to it in the Buddhist tradition, also the body was misregarded, not so precious as in comparison with the spirit. I think that is we can find it common in Christianity and Buddhism, but in Zen monastic tradition reveals a relatively flexible attitude toward eating and drinking for our body. In the instruction for the cook, Dogen emphasized that cooking as a work in the everyday life of the temple is tantamount to seeking the Buddhist Dharma, the truth. Thus, kitchen work in temple is a form of spiritual cultivation equal to the meditation. As we read in Dogen's book, what is that? Okay. I lost myself in Zen temple. Okay, cooking is a very way of Dharma seeking, which demands the cook monk to abandon any kind of discrimination about food. There should not be a rich or poor food. Here we can find the Buddhist tradition of begging, which instructs the begging monk to receive whatever is offered by the people with gratitude. So I skip this quotation. Okay, just cooking is a practice for the attaining the Buddhist truth. Eating is also a way to get this Buddhist truth. In his book, The Dharma for Taking Food, Dogen quotes phrases from the Vimalakirti Sutra saying, if you can remain the same with food, all dharmas also remain the same. If all dharmas are the same, then also with food you will remain the same. Dogen then added the following explanation. Just let dharma be same as food, and let food be the same as dharma. For this reason, if dharmas are the dharma nature, then food also the dharma nature. If the dharma is suchness, food also is suchness. If the dharma is the single mind, food also is a single mind. If the dharma is body, the wisdom, then food also is wisdom. They are named the same and their significance is the same, so it is said that they are the same. So food or eating food is same as the awakening the dharma. What does this same mean? Dogen replied that the same is not the same means of parity or equality, but the same means of awakening to the true sameness. Awakening to the true sameness is the ultimate identity of all the suchness from beginning to end. The suchness of the ultimate identity from beginning to end is the genuine form of all dharmas, which only a Buddha together with the Buddha can exhaustively penetrate. Therefore, food is the dharma of all dharmas, which only a Buddha together with a Buddha exhaustively penetrate. Just at such a time, there are the genuine marks, nature, substance, power, function, causes, and conditions. For this reason, dharma is itself food, food is itself dharma. This dharma is what is received and used by all Buddhas in the past and future. This food is the fulfillment, that the joy of dharma and the delight of meditation. So the phrase that dharma is food and food is dharma, dharma means the Buddhist truth, the food is dharma, that means that food and dharma are nothing but the self here and now. The dharma, food, all of them are the emergence of the true self, my true self. Already in his masterpiece of his Zen understanding, the treasury of the true Dharma I, Shobogenzo, Dogen stressed that eating in ordinary life is the same as the extraordinary matter in Zen practice, which means sitting alone in a dashong pit. Being busy, moving around to prepare meals or eating meals is equivalent to sitting alone on top of a high mountain meditating, because to forget oneself by being indulged in walking for cooking and eating is tantamount to be selfless self through the meditation. Dogen said, in the house of the Buddhas and ancestors, there is always the extraordinary matter. It is sitting alone in Dashong Peak, the high mountain, the great mountain, the mountain of Buddha, the mountain of enlightenment. Even to encounter here, let this fellow sit there. This is also the extraordinary matter. Going further, there's something even more extraordinary than that. That is, each and every instance of extraordinary matter is having rice to eat. Thus, sitting alone in Dashong Peak, that is having rice. Sitting alone in high mountain and concentrate oneself in Zen meditation is all the same with eating in our everyday life. So, Dogen. I have still 10 or 10. I have to order myself. The monk's meditation has its origin in the meditation of Buddha himself, which means a monk's meditation is carried out as a meditation of Buddha himself. Between the two, there should be no difference. The meditation of Buddha himself and the meditation of monk here and now, there's no difference between two of them. Between the two, there should be no difference. Then a monk's meditation can be understood in the way that a monk meditates while Buddha meditates in the midst of a monk. So I quote, when I get hungry is the way of life of one who has had rice. One who has not had rice cannot be hungry. So that means when we feel hungry, that means we already eat rice. If we did not eat rice, we cannot feel hungry. So when we feel hungry, so when we're seeking something for the way or something like that, that means we had already in these truths, in the enlightenment. So eating is not, so in this sense, eating is not an extraordinary behavior. Clearly, we should receive and keep this address to the assembly. Some 30 years of concentrated effort in a community of the Buddhas and sisters was just having rice. So 30 years of meditation, practice in Zen meditation, that is just having rice in our daily lives. So there's no distinction. That is, I think, the most fundamental insight of this on these eating food questions. As said above, one of the characteristics of Zen Buddhism is found in its emphasis on everydayness and non-extraordinariness. An anecdote on eating food from Hua Hai, I just showed him, tells us the typical Zen Buddhist way of understanding eating food. A Vinaya master named Yuan once came to and asked, "Do you make efforts in your practice of the way, master?" "Yes, I do." "How?" "When hungry, I eat. When tired, I sleep." "And does everybody make the same efforts as you do, master?" "Not in the same way." "Why not?" "When they are eating, they think of 100 kinds of necessities, and when they are going to sleep, they ponder over affairs of 1,000 different kinds. That is how they differ from me." At this, the Vinaya master was silent. The Zen Buddhism always teaches us that when you are hungry, you eat. When you are sleepy, you sleep. That which represents that the ordinary mind is the truth. The mind maxim composed by Seung in the 7th century tells us, the perfect way is not difficult. It only avoids discrimination. If only there's no love or hate. Completely clean and clear is it. So, the conclusion, to succeed the Buddhist tradition and transmit its truth possible, I think the main point of this Buddhist attitude toward the eating food and Christian attitude toward eating food is to get over our attachment and also our discrimination. I think that is the common element in two religious traditions we can find in these two religious traditions. I skip to the conclusions. As mentioned earlier, the term Bodhisattva in Mahayana Buddhism originally referred to Shakyamuni during his ascetic training in a previous life. However, the concept of later expanded to encompass all aesthetics. The one important story related to the meat eating is the well-known story of the supreme sacrifice of King Shibi. Shibi, who was practicing almsgiving, saved a dove being chased by a hawk. So a dove came to the king and asked him to save my life. I was thrown by a hawk. So he saved the dove. But the hawk pleaded with the king, saying that if it did not eat that dove's flesh, I would starve to death. The king granted the hawk's request, and at last he allowed himself to be eaten by the hawk. So this is the famous story of the sacrifice of King Shibi. This is the free life of Buddha. In this story, which describes the extreme act of self-sacrifice for the sake of saving others, the king's body is given to the hawk, and both hawk and the dove are saved while the king himself dies. It is shown that in a situation where one cannot maintain one's own body without taking another's life and eating another's flesh, there is no choice but to do so. In such a situation, a bodhisattva who would offer one's flesh to another would not accept eating another's flesh, of course. But at the same time, the story of King Shibi teaches us about the boundary situation of human beings regarding eating food. When we eat, we deprive another being of his life in whatever form, which also means that we have no other choice. In this sense, eating food is holy, in that it endows us with the energy of life, but eating food teaches us that we are very humble beings, in that we deprive other beings of their lives for the sake of our own life. And such an approach to eating food, as I presented today, finds itself as being intrinsically connected to the religious insight that is a quote from my colleague Adriano. Religions, especially biblical religions, introduce a clear distinction between need and desire by listing a series of precepts that regulate through a balanced human relationship with the food, an equally balanced human relationship with the world. In the sense that those relations involve transformative processes which create new relationships, making us aware of the existence of other religions, other realities. I believe that the Buddhist teaching of eating food without attachment and the Christian understanding of eating food without discrimination instruct us that the need must be addressed and the desire should be controlled. However, when we realize that addressing the need and controlling the desire are always broken along the way, the religious dimension of eating food can be revealed in its true meaning. Non-attachment and non-discrimination describe not only the relationship between the eater and the eaten, but also the relationship between the eaters in different cultures and religions. As we have frequently experienced, interreligious dialogue often begins and ends with a verbal exchange of abstract dogmatic self-assertion, where dialogue becomes a variation of ventriloquism. The issue of eating food could be a soft catalyst for approaching interreligious dialogue in a realm of our ordinary bodily life. After overall, it will bring people from different religious traditions together, not in the conference room, but at the banquet table. And sitting at this banquet table, we should not forget that old wisdom. That means you shall not make decision on an empty stomach, and you shall not speak with your mouth full. So, as a conclusion, I will show the very famous Zen painting drawn by Seung, a Japanese monk, and the title is, in this English tradition, is sometimes the universe or sometimes the scale, triangle, circle. I don't know what it means. Whatever you can interpret, that also belongs to the Zen. But one thing I can remember by seeing this Zen painting was the pizza koans. So this is my koan. Oh, it's a so-called pizza in a scale box, then eaten in a triangle and split. Thank you very much.